Alright guys, welcome back to Underground Science, and in this video we'll be looking at the basic structure of our MHC type 1 complex, alright? So in the previous videos we've been talking a lot about MHC type 2 complexes, or major histocompatibility complex type 2. In this video we'll be looking at the basic structure of the major histocompatibility complex type 1. Alright, and we'll be listing out a very important and a very popular example of a white blood cell that attaches to MHC type 1 complexes to induce its effects. All right, so let's go and get started. So here we see four separate subunits. All right, and so in a regular picture, right? So let me go and color this in real quick. Probably shouldn't color it in all the way because it'll just be boring, I guess. But if we looked at a regular picture of a MHC type 1 or 2 complex, right? If we just drew it out like let's say we drew it out in a regular, like a B cell or a dendritic cell or something like that. Let's say this is our B cell, right? And we have, whenever we used to draw it, let's say this is our MHC type 2, right? This is our MHC type 2. Well, we drew it like this, but you can also see it drawn like this also. All right, so it can also be drawn like that. All right, so slight curve to it. But so we can look at a zoom-in version so we'll look at an MHC type 2 complex structure later in another video. This video is about MHC type 1 structure. So it turns out that we have actually 3 alpha parts, or alpha protein parts, of among the 4 protein complexes, you could say, that make up our MHC type 1 complex. All right, so we have 3 alpha parts, 3 alpha protein complexes among the 4 protein complexes that are present in our in our MHC type 1 complex. Now you're probably wondering, what's the 4th one? Well, that's going to be a beta 2 complex. All right, so let's go ahead and draw that. So let's go and color these in first, just a little bit at least, right? So just a little bit more, and then we'll go and look at which of these complexes are alpha and beta. So we said we have 3 alpha, so we can actually label it like this, right? We can label it like this can be like alpha 1, this can be an alpha 2 complex, and this can be a alpha 3 complex, and then we also have a beta 2 complex here. So you know what, let me just go and write that down in another color, like so. All right, so this is going to be a beta 2 complex. I don't know why I wrote it like an exponent, but I guess that's how I wrote it. All right, so we have, just the main thing to remember is we have 3 alpha complexes and 1 beta complex, but it's not a beta 1 complex, it's actually a beta 2 complex. So that's the basic structure of a MHC type 1 histocompatibility complex. And remember, on these, we'll probably see, if this is a zoomed in version, we can see a huge antigen, right, present here. So we can actually color it in. Let's say this is an antigen. Because remember, these also present antigens, even though it's an MHC type 1. But it's going to be for a different reason, and we'll see why in another video. All right, but one cell that we can talk about, that we'll talk about in a future video, is that we have these, it's a type of T lymphocyte actually. It's called a cytotoxic T cell, and this is part, again, of the adaptive immune system. So it's part of the adaptive immune system. And remember, the part of the adaptive immune system, right, that's involved in that actually has T lymphocytes involved in it. So let me just go ahead and spell this right. So the part of the adaptive immune system that has T lymphocytes involved in it are also part of the cell-mediated response. All right, so cell-mediated response. All right, so that's pretty much it, right? So for the cytotoxic T cells, in terms of what part of the immune system it's in, right? And it's part of the cell-mediated response because it has to do with T lymphocytes. But the relation to cytotoxic T cells and MHC-1 complexes is that if you recall from our previous videos, right, we talked about CD4 positive cells. So we've been talking about CD4 positive cells, are also known as helper T cells. And so let's go and write that down, also known as helper T cells. And the reason why we said these were also known as helper T cells is because these helper T cells contained CD4 glycoproteins on their plasma membrane. All right. So, but the same thing goes with here. So what happens in what's true in cytotoxic T cells is that they're also going to have a glycoprotein on their surface of their membrane, but it's not going to be a CD4. It's actually going to be called a CD8 protein, a CD8 glycoprotein. So they're going to have a CD8 glycoprotein on their surface of their membrane. All right, so they're going to have a CD8 glycoprotein. And so because they have CD8 glycoprotein, cytotoxic T cells are also called CD8 positive white blood cells. All right, and so it turns out, remember, CD4 glycoproteins, remember, attach themselves to MHC-2 complexes. So they attach themselves to MHC-2 complexes. However, CD8 glycoproteins attach themselves to MHC-1 complexes, not MHC-2 complexes. All right, so they attach themselves to MHC-1 complexes, yeah. And so in this case, so cytotoxic T cells use their CD8 glycoprotein to attach themselves on MHC-1 complexes. And another thing to know is that MHC-1 complexes, so let's go and write this down, MHC-1 complexes are present on most nucleated cells. All right, so they're present on most nucleated cells, so cells that have a nucleus will have couldn't speak there, will have a MHC-1 complex on them. And so the basic role of an MHC-1 complex, so let's say we have a regular cell here, a body cell, and they're going to have a MHC-1 complex on them, right? They're going to have a MHC-1 complex on them. So let's go and draw it like the zoomed in version. And with its alpha 1, 2, 3 complex and its beta 2 complex. However, what's going to happen is that if this cell is infected with a pathogen, we have certain proteases inside our cell that will destroy that pathogen up, break it into smaller proteins, and present that pathogen's antigen on its MHC-1 complex. And what this can lead to is cytotoxic T cells. So let's say we have a cytotoxic T cell here. What it can lead to is that cytotoxic T cells can also come in, right? And these T cells also have a specific receptor. These T cells can also come in and bind onto the complementary antigen and also use their CD8 glycoprotein to attach onto the MHC-1 complex. So this is our CD8 glycoprotein and this is our MHC-1 complex. And these cytotoxic T cells can release certain types of enzymes, right, to lyse this cell, all right, that's infected. Now another thing they can do is that cells that are cancerous will have abnormal proteins presented on their MHC-1 complex. So these cytotoxic T cells can do the same thing, bind to it with the CD8 and lyse it. And actually what can also happen is that once they do bind and lyse it, these cytotoxic T cells can actually proliferate into memory cytotoxic T cells and effector cytotoxic T cells. So they can proliferate into memory cytotoxic T cells and effector cytotoxic T cells. All right, so an effector cytotoxic T cells. Just like we saw with our helper T cells and B cells. All right, so once it becomes activated through the binding process of the CD8 glycoprotein and the cytotoxic T cell receptor onto the complementary antigen, right? If this is a viral antigen or a cancerous antigen, then the cytotoxic T cell can bind to it, lyse it, and also create effector cytotoxic T cells specific to this particular antigen, and memory cytotoxic T cells in case we see this specific antigen again in the future. All right. And so I guess in this, we talked about cytotoxic T cells and MHC-1 complexes. All right. So that's good. And so that's pretty much what I wanted to get through in this video, right? Or the basic idea of our MHC-1 complexes. All right, so I hope this video made sense to you guys. I hope to see you guys in my future videos. We'll talk about more cool topics about biochem, physics, and chem. Don't forget to hit that notification bell, like, and subscribe. See you guys later, and stay safe.